Battling fierce tropical weather, Flight 269 begins its final approach toward Phuket International Airport. Strong winds slam against the aircraft, pushing it off the glide path. The co-pilot struggles to realign, fighting turbulence as the runway disappears in sheets of rain. The descent rate is too high, and rather than risk a disastrous landing, the crew makes the critical call: a go-around. Landing gear retracts, flaps are adjusted, and for a moment safety seems near. But just as the plane starts to climb, the engines lose thrust, speed plummets, and the aircraft begins to sink back toward danger. Will they recover in time, or is it already too late? It's the afternoon of September 16, 2007. 12Go Airlines Flight 269 prepares for departure from Don Mueang International Airport in Bangkok. On board are 123 passengers and 7 crew members, bound for the resort island of Phuket, a short 1-hour hop that should have been routine. But this was a day when every small weakness in the system would be exposed. 12Go Airlines, a low-cost carrier owned by Orient Thai Airlines, was known for cheap flights and questionable safety standards. The airline's pilots often worked extended hours, and its maintenance routines were under frequent scrutiny. The aircraft that day, a McDonnell Douglas MD-82 built in 1983, was old but still considered reliable, a workhorse in many fleets around the world. At the controls were 2 men separated by both experience and exhaustion. The captain, a 57-year-old veteran from Indonesia, logged over 16,000 hours in the air, more than 4,000 on the MD-82. His co-pilot, a 30-year-old Thai national, had just over 1,400 hours, still building his career. But both had exceeded their legal flight and duty limits that week. Fatigue was quietly sitting in the cockpit long before the engine started. As passengers settled into their seats, Phuket was being pounded by torrential rain and strong crosswinds. The pilots, aware of worsening weather, decided to take on extra fuel, a precaution in case they had to divert. Once all checks were complete and clearance was granted, Flight 269 began its taxi toward the runway, unaware of the chaos awaiting them an hour later. Takeoff from Bangkok was smooth. The aircraft climbed to its cruising altitude of 32,000 feet, and the passengers relaxed for what they believed would be a normal flight. But as the MD-82 approached Phuket, radar showed a mass of thunderstorms clustered directly over the island. The approach controller instructed the crew to descend to 8,000 feet and prepare for the ILS approach to runway 27. This system should have guided them safely, but the weather that day was testing the limits of both man and machine. The airport's wind shear detection system, normally a vital tool during storms, wasn't fully operational due to low solar power from the heavy overcast. Moments earlier, another flight, Orient Thai 271, had landed safely but reported severe wind shear on approach. It was a clear warning that the skies were unpredictable. When asked if they had received the warning, the captain confirmed they had, yet chose to proceed with the landing. It was a decision that would soon turn fatal. At 3:37 p.m., the controller informed the crew that surface winds were blowing at 15 knots from 240 degrees, challenging but manageable. A minute later, they intensified to 30 knots. The aircraft was being tossed around by invisible forces. The captain and co-pilot continued their descent, configuring the flaps and lowering the landing gear as rain lashed against the windshield. At 500 feet, the autopilot was disengaged to manually align with the offset runway, forcing the fatigued co-pilot to hand fly through chaos. He forgot, however, to disengage the auto throttle, a mistake that would seal their fate. The wind outside intensified as Flight 269 dropped below 400 feet. The aircraft bucked violently as gusts hit the wings from alternating sides. The co-pilot gripped the controls tightly, trying to hold the center line, but the MD-82 was descending too fast, over 1,800 feet per minute. This was no longer a stabilized approach, and by all airline procedures, the landing should have been aborted. The co-pilot called for a go-around, and the captain agreed. The landing gear was retracted, flaps adjusted, and the nose pitched upward. For a brief moment, it seemed the aircraft might climb out safely. But one crucial action was missed. The co-pilot never activated the TOS switch, the button that commands the engines to produce maximum thrust during a go-around. Instead, he pushed the throttles forward manually. What he didn't realize was that the auto throttle was still engaged, and its system mode was set to idle power for landing. When the co-pilot released the throttles, the system automatically reduced thrust again, just as the aircraft needed power the most. The MD-82 began to lose airspeed rapidly. The engines spooled down, and the aircraft's nose pitched higher in an attempt to climb, worsening stall risk. Alarms began to sound in the cockpit. The captain took control, but confusion and fatigue clouded their judgment. Neither pilot realized that it was the auto throttle itself that was cutting engine power. Within seconds, altitude began to collapse. At just 300 feet above the ground, the aircraft shuddered violently as the stall warning blared. The ground proximity warning system shouted, "Pull up! Pull up!" But there was no time left to recover. At 3:40 p.m., the MD-82 slammed into an embankment just north of runway 27. The impact broke the fuselage into 3 sections, and the aircraft erupted into flames. Thick smoke poured from the wreckage as emergency crews scrambled toward the crash site. Rescue operations were hampered by the storm and difficult terrain. A drainage ditch running parallel to the runway blocked vehicles from reaching the site quickly. The first ambulance arrived alone, while fire trucks and other rescue teams took nearly 30 minutes to get there. By then, the flames had already consumed much of the wreckage. Of the 130 people on board, 90 lost their lives, including both pilots. 40 others were pulled from the burning debris, many severely injured. The disaster was one of Thailand's deadliest aviation tragedies. In the following days, the Aircraft Accident Investigation Committee of Thailand began its work. Investigators quickly found that human error, fatigue, and poor training were the main causes. The crew's failure to execute a proper go-around and the omission of the TOS switch activation were crucial mistakes. But the problems went deeper than one flight. The investigation revealed serious flaws in 12Go Airlines' operations. Both pilots had exceeded legal flight and duty time limits, and the company's oversight of rest regulations was almost non-existent. There were also issues with cockpit communication and crew resource management. The captain and co-pilot failed to properly coordinate or challenge each other's decisions during the most critical phase of flight. The report concluded that the airline's culture placed schedule and cost above safety. The MD-82 systems had functioned properly. It was the chain of human and organizational errors that caused the disaster. In response, the European Union blacklisted 12Go Airlines, citing major safety concerns. The airline never fully recovered from its damaged reputation and ceased operations in 2018. For many families, the scars of Flight 269's final minutes would never fade. What if the co-pilot had disengaged the autothrottle and activated TOGA thrust at the moment of the go-around? The engines would have delivered full power instantly, the aircraft would have climbed away from danger, and 130 people would have landed safely in Phuket minutes later. Sometimes, one missed button can mark the line between survival and tragedy.